Men carry a body down off a farm at Salem Farms and lay it out where 12 other men can look at it. It is June 1st, 1676. The 12 were picked that morning by the constable, and their work is to write down what they can see. What they see is the man's left arm, the right thigh, a great bruise very much swelled, small of the back, and color differing from the rest of him. They cut into that one to be sure. What is under the skin is bruised and runs with a jelly. The dead man is Jacob Goodale. He lived in the house of the farmer whose ground this is, and the farmer is a man named Giles Corey. The question in front of those 12 men is what to write down. The question in front of the court that will read it is what any of it is worth. 16 years from now, the same court will be asked the same question about Giles Corey, and it will answer that one too. Jacob Goodale had been in that house a long time. He was referred to as almost a natural fool, a grown man who needed keeping. For as long as the neighbors could remember him, he had looked strong and well. He stood up straight, with color in his face, and his eyes clear. One winter, a neighbor stood and watched Giles Corey beat him with a wooden stick about an inch thick. The neighbor counted each blow. 1, 2, 10, 20, 50, 100. He eventually ran inside and told Corey he would knock him down himself if he did not stop. Jacob Goodale's brother never saw any of it himself. What he swore was that his brother had been very much beaten and wronged. A couple months later, Corey came to Jacob's brother wanting help. Jacob had had a fall, he said, and he thought the arm was broken. They got him as far as a neighbor's house, stooping, pale, his eyes sunk back in his head. And he did not get up again. The court wrote one sentence about all of that. Giles Corey, presented upon suspicion of abusing the body of Jacob Goodale by beating, was fined. "16 years later, in March of 1692, the Essex County courtrooms take Giles Corey's wife. Martha Corey is the third person in Salem examined that way. 3 days later, her now 80-year-old, white-haired husband swears out a statement of his own about her. That when he went to pray, he could not utter his desires with any sense, nor open his mouth to speak, until she came to him. That a cat was strangely taken on the sudden, and his wife told him to knock it in the head. He would not, and the cat got better. He never uses the word witch. He does not have to. And a neighbor swore to something harder than any of it, not to a cat or a prayer, to a sentence Giles Corey had said out loud about his wife. Martha Corey goes to jail. Less than a month later, the courts come for him too. In April, it is Giles Corey who walks into the Essex County courtroom. He stands up in front of the magistrates, and he denies it in the way an old man denies a thing he finds stupid. I never did hurt them. I never had temptations in my life. I never saw nothing but my cattle. so they read the neighbor's sentence back to him. Giles Corey had said he knew enough against his wife that would do her business. Then they read him his own statement, the cat and the prayer that stopped, and they ask him what he meant by any of it. I have said what I can say to that. They ask him again. I have said what I can say to that. An 80-year-old man about his wife. I have said what I can say to that. In September, they bring him to be tried. They ask him the first question. He pleads not guilty. And then the court asks him the second question. The room he is standing in is a plain building, put up the way the colony put up all of them. Unpainted board walls, clear glass in the windows, hard benches in a gallery above him. A table at the front where the magistrates sit, close enough that a man answering them does not have to raise his voice. And behind him, the room is full. They ask him, "How will you be tried?" This is a question of pure formality. The question is asked the same way every time. And every time, it is answered the same way. By God and my country. Before the Constitution, this is how a man must answer to ensure he is tried in front of a jury. Giles Corey says nothing. A man who says nothing cannot be tried. And a man who cannot be tried has one thing left for him, and it is not a courtroom. There are reasons a man might do this. A man who was never convicted never forfeits his assets to the crown. A man who has watched this court work knows that it clears nobody, and knows the same witnesses are waiting for him. Or a man is past 80 and has been asked enough questions. The court asks him again, "How will you be tried?" Giles Corey says nothing. The court sends for a man who knows him, and Captain Gardner comes over from Nantucket. He is an old friend, which is exactly why the court sent for him. A stranger can be refused all day. An old friend sits down close and asks once, and a man finds he is already talking. The court gives Gardner 2 days to get 5 words. Gardner will get them out of him. Giles Corey is in his 80s. He has stood in an Essex County court before. He stood in one 16 years ago, and it fined him. He has been asked to explain himself before, to which he replied, "I have said what I can say to that." This time, though, a friend sits with him and asks him for 5 words. Giles Corey says nothing. At noon on September 19th, 1692, at Salem, Giles Corey is pressed to death under stones for standing mute. He was the only person it was ever done to in America. Near the end of it, his tongue was pressed out of his mouth. The sheriff put it back in with his cane. That night, one of the men who had sat in judgment wrote it down in his diary. His name was Samuel Sewall. 9 men sat on that court, and 5 years later, he was the only one of the 9 who ever stood up in public and took the blame for it. About noon at Salem, Giles Corey was pressed to death for standing mute. Much pains was used with him 2 days, one after another, by the court and Captain Gardner of Nantucket, who had been his acquaintance. but all in vain. The next day, somebody told Sewall something about the dead man, and he wrote about him again. "Now I hear from Salem," Sewall wrote, "that about 18 years ago he was suspected to have stamped and pressed a man to death, but was cleared." The night before, Samuel Sewall had written down the death of an old man who would not speak. A day later, he wrote about the same man again. And this time, Giles Corey was the one who had beaten a man to death and been let go. The court did not clear Giles Corey of this crime. They fined him. 3 days after the pressing, the courts hanged his wife with 7 others. Somebody near enough to hear her words wrote that she protested her innocency and concluded her life with an eminent prayer upon the latter. Almost 200 years later, somebody printed a ballad about the pressing and gave Giles Corey 2 words to say under the stones: "More weight." Arthur Miller borrowed those words when he wrote The Crucible, and after that everyone had heard them. Nobody ever got words out of Giles Corey. Not the magistrates in April, not the court in September, not the friend who came from Nantucket and sat with him 2 days. The last thing anybody did to Giles Corey's mouth was done with a cane.